Hey guys, this is Doug again from fellowshipofthemartyrs.com. I want to talk to you some about marriage. Specifically, I want to talk about marriage licenses. Evidently, the videos that I have about marriage licenses aren't, maybe they're too long, maybe people don't want to watch them, maybe they're not sinking in or whatever. But I would refer you to the longer videos where there's links and lots more information, where I read legal opinions and lots of resources that are available online and stuff like that. Short of it is this. People say that you have to be legally married. To be legally married infers that there's such a thing as illegally married. Okay, now, in the state of Missouri, what would constitute illegally married? For example, in the state of Missouri, if it was two people of the same sex, if it was, this is from section 451.020 of the Missouri Code, parents to children, grandparents to grandchildren of any degree, brothers and sisters of half as well as whole blood, uncles and nieces, aunts and nephews, first cousins, and people who lack the capacity to enter a marriage contract, their marriages would be void. And it is unlawful for any city, county, or state official having authority to issue marriages, whatever, and that the person that issued them a license would be guilty of a misdemeanor. It doesn't say that the persons involved are going to be prosecuted or that it is a crime for them, simply that whoever approved it, knowing that state law prohibited it, that it would be an illegal union and voided. Okay, now barring those circumstances, is it illegal for you to have a wedding without a marriage license? Or just declare before God, before witnesses, in whatever way, that you are husband and wife? Well, in many states in the United States, including Alabama, Colorado, District of Columbia, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Montana, New Hampshire, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah, to some degree or another, a common law marriage only requires you to say, this is my wife, she agrees to it, you cohabitate for some period of time, it could be a few weeks, it could be 6 months, whatever, and that you're both of mental capacity capable of making such a decision. Bam. That's it. You're married. You don't need a marriage license, you don't need a justice of the peace, you don't even need a ceremony with a pastor. You don't need nothing except for her to sign her name with your last name, or for you to file taxes together, or for just basically to cohabit and introduce to other people, this is my wife. That's it. You're married. Look it up. Check. The states that have common law marriages have varying different degrees. A couple of them have grandfathered some and are changing it or whatever. But for a marriage, for you to give somebody trouble and say, are you legally married? You have to then determine what illegally married is, and whether the state even believes in such a thing, or whether two adults who are not related, who say, this is my wife, this is my husband, and acknowledge it, and live as husband and wife, and cohabit, and participate in the general things that make a person husband and wife, does the state override, overrule, and void that? There may be a penalty because they didn't do a marriage license. You might not be able to participate in the government systems because you don't have the piece of paper they want you to have. So it might complicate, what do we do if they're in the hospital and nobody will let me in? What do we do? Can I get a death certificate? Can I get the insurance? Whatever like that. But in some states, that kind of stuff is a little more complicated than others. But you need to understand that fundamentally, according to the United States Supreme Court, marriage is a right. You do not get a license. You are not required to get a license to do something that is fundamentally a right. That is to say, the Constitution has said that the state cannot prohibit people from getting married, except in cases where they're relatives or, whatever. So, except in a very limited range, for public health reasons, the government cannot limit who is wanting to marry whom. And that all states need to basically accept the decisions of other states. So, in some states, the cohabitation is not even a requirement. Simply that you state, in that state, this is my wife. Bam, you're official. And then the state you go back to has to acknowledge it and has to receive it. So even though Missouri isn't a common law state, Missouri acknowledges common law marriages from all the states that have that. And there are other procedures in other states. In Missouri, I talked to an attorney today, specifically and asked him this question, and he said that basically, if you did not have a marriage license, the state would consider you cohabitating, and should there be a breakup or some other thing, then they would have to consider it based on contract law. That is to say, what agreements have you made between each other about the stuff? Whose kid is it? Whose car is it? Whatever, and you'd have to go to court and argue that stuff out in the case of a breakup, and so on. So they don't even say that it's against the law to live as husband and wife, to claim to be husband and wife, to cohabitate as husband and wife. It's just that you're not inside their legal system, the little bucket that they want you to be in, should it go sour, so you have to handle it as contract law rather than marriage, family law, domestic law. But again, there's no penalty, there's no requirement from the state that you can only use the term husband and wife if you have their piece of paper. The United States Supreme Court has said, and pretty much every state will acknowledge, that a family Bible with a written document, we were married on such and such a date with such and such witnesses, will hold up in court. Even without that, you're going to have to decide whether, and other documents like filing taxes together, or statements back and forth to each other, or places where they've been introduced to witnesses as husband and wife, counts. And if even in the common law states, at a certain point, if you are to break up, there's no such thing as a common law divorce. You have to go through the regular legal procedure for divorce. The common law process only gets you to the place where you would have been if you'd have got a marriage license in the first place. My point all along has been, as with many, many other pastors around the country, that I refuse to be an agent of the government. I refuse to sign a license which is optional, which is not required, constitutionally, Supreme Court decisions. I refuse to enslave myself, my marriage, and the fruit of my marriage to the state. A marriage license is a contract between you and her and the government, making them the owners of that contract and the fruit of that contract. That means they own your kids. And there are already public school issues where I don't want my kid to sit through that assembly to hear about homosexual issues or whatever. We're sorry, you don't have a choice. They got to come. What do you mean they don't have a choice? I'm the parent. Doesn't matter. They're our kid. How does the public school get authority over my kids? Because of your marriage license. They are the fruit of that contract, and that contract belongs to the state. That's our kid. There are people asserting that right now. Right now, okay? Now, I am not going to what I believe to be an illegal contract, because the parties are not informed. And for it to be a consensual contract, a legal contract, the parties have to be informed about what they're getting into, and they're not. So I believe it's an illegal contract that sets the government as the head of your marriage. And I'm not going to hold my hand up and say, as a duly authorized, appointed agent of the state of Missouri by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. God forbid. That is not my job, and I do not want any part of that. Nor do I want the government to be in charge in any way over the fruit of whatever. There are a lot of people that understand that churches should not be 501c3 corporations that are beholding to the government. In fact, you can be an unregistered church You don't have to file Form 990s. You don't have to get special permission to be tax exempt. Constitutionally, you are non-taxable by simply saying, I'm a church, and looking basically like at least 8 of the 14 criteria for what they think a church should look like. Okay? The Church of Liberty is an unregistered church. According to the IRS, it is tax exempt. It is able to write donation letters and everything else without having to be a 501c3 corporation, which sets the government as its head and puts it in charge of that contract. Now, there's a lot of people that understand that the church, that your particular assembly really should not be beholden to the government that way and have the state as its head. But they're going to differ with me when it's optional. It doesn't have to be that way. You could just say, I'm a church, and they have to leave you alone. They're gonna agree that with the importance of that, but they're going to disagree with me about a marriage license, which is exactly the same thing, which is an optional contract with the government that even the government says is optional. And the government says that it's a right, and a license is special permission to do something that would otherwise be illegal. And getting married is not illegal, except in the cases specified by whichever state's law. And in some states you can marry your cousins, so have at it. So, anyway, when somebody says, are you legally married? I say, well, what would it mean to be illegally married? How exactly would the state say that I had committed a crime by being with this person, who's not my cousin, who's not my grandma, whatever? There is no. There is no. And in many states, just by simply cohabitating for a few weeks and introducing her to someone as your wife, bam, you're married. That's it. It's official. And to break up, you have to go to divorce court, get a thing from a magistrate, and the whole deal. In fact, you need to be very careful in some states that if you don't intend to be married to that person and you're sharing a space with them, that you write a letter saying, this is not my wife, I never intend for her to be my wife, and we are not common law married no matter how long we live together. Otherwise, the courts could assume that she's your wife just based simply on the fact that you were cohabitating. Okay? This is not just a simple little thing. There's contract law involved. There's governmental control. There's New World Order stuff involved and everything else. I'm going to stand, along with many, many pastors and church leaders all over the country, that I do not want to, under any circumstances, become an agent of the government or be used by the government to endorse and notarize a contract putting the government in charge of these two people and their future. It's optional. That is to say, not required, and I don't believe in any way necessary, except by the filters and lenses that have been put on the religious to believe that they have to obey the government and that we have to obey the laws of the land and that we have to do what government tells us. Now, you're going to use Romans 13 and other things to say that all governments are set in place by God and we have to obey them. And I'm going to say that's not what Romans 13 says at all. And if all governments are set in place by God and to resist them we heap damnation on our head, then we cannot go to war against Hitler because he was set in place by God. We cannot have a civil rights movement. We cannot impeach a president. We can't even vote people out of office because they're set in place by God, and to resist them in any way would heap damnation on us. That passage cannot be about civil governments. It's about God's spiritual governments and the people that he sets in place to rule his kingdom. Just look on either side of that chapter. It's not about civil governments. So, if you are going to preach to people that we have to obey the government, when they pass a law saying you have to take the mark of the beast, remember that you said that. And march down the little line and take the little mark, because to resist the power will heap damnation on you. That cannot be. So, anyway, that's all I got real quick for this video. I encourage you to go watch the other 2 videos about marriage licenses and study up and be informed. Show yourself approved. So that you don't get snookered into something that will later come back and bite you. And listen to the Lord very carefully about whether he wants you to obey him or he wants you to obey the laws of the land that are optional anyway and are trying to entrap you. That's all I have for now. Lots more at fellowshipofthemartyrs.com.